3. No, General Zay. Finding Chief Scientist Kosai is as much a priority as locating General Grievous. Our survival depends on a strong army, and that means the highest quality clones. Conscriptions of ordinary citizens is a poor second and would be politically unacceptable. Find her, if only to deny the separatists her expertise. You have the best intelligence assets the Republic has ever known, so I'll accept no excuses. Chancellor Palpatine, to Jedi General Arlington Zay, Director of Special Forces, Grand Army of the Republic. Deepwater class ship Ayahana, Magneto Space, 471 days after Geonosis. Fairfax, Scarata sighed, watching the transponders mapped on the cockpit holochart. The picket of ships around Magneto made it look as if it were ringed by its own constellation. I know Picara's keeping them busy down there, but that's still quite a gauntlet to run. And we're a 45-meter cargo ship, Odo said. Just a laser cannon by way of armament. Mandalorian crew in full Beskar gam. Definitely not a Republic vessel. What do you think? Just walk in? Could do. Nothing links us to the Republic, and I always carry a range of current transponder codes, so that's an easy fix. Well, we won't win a battle with a warship, so that's our choice made for us. Of course, a submersible's sensors are perfect for getting an accurate three-dimensional scan of the site. In we go then, Ordica. Oro studied the long-range orbital scan of the landing site. It was a vast glacier in a landscape of sheet ice and crystal rock. The penetrating scan showed few crevices, but the sheet was honeycombed with irregular tunnels that meandered around one another like tangled yarn, and occasionally crossed. The straight uniform outlines of the ventilation shafts were easy to identify by contrast. Around the warm shafts, underground lakes of melted water had formed, capped by thinner ice sheets. Odo copied the section of holochart to his datapad, and didn't even have to do the calculations to realize that searching each tunnel in the site that Delta had pinpointed would take days. Too long. An idea formed immediately in his mind, as well as a theory on what had happened to Val. He might have fallen into the warren of tunnels, or through the ice into the liquid water beneath. It wasn't good either way. Crystal worm tunnels, Odo said. It's fascinating how life forms survive even in the most extreme places. If Val's out in those temperatures, said Scarata, he won't be one of them. It's been hours. Even in his Beskar game, the seals won't keep out that kind of cold indefinitely. Odo slid his electronic tool case out of his sleeve and took out an overwrite probe. He selected a randomly generated transponder code with a Mandalore prefix and Ayahan, ceased to register as license on Mon Calamari. Okay, Calbia. Now or never. He maneuvered Ayahan into a landing trajectory and wondered whether to brazen it out by pinging Magito traffic control and requesting permission to land. No water on board. A civilian vessel that anyone could scan to confirm its configuration. He thought that the moment they got out of here, and a couple of wandering mercs at the helm, even with the battle going on, he might get away with it. He opened the traffic frequencies. Magito, TC. This is Mandalorian cargo vessel Ayahan. Request permission to sit down for replenishment. The pause was longer than he expected. Ayahan, this is Magito TC. For Mandalorians, you're remarkably slow to notice we have hostilities ongoing. Magito scanned our tanks for water. The next pause was even longer. Ayahan, we note your tanks are zeroed. Unfortunately, our city facilities are closed. Remember the hostilities. If he was turned away now, he'd blown it. They'd drawn Magito's attention to them. Magito, there appears to be water just under the surface west of the hostilities, and Mandalore does give assistance to the Sis. Will we feel at our own risk? Ayahan, okay, go ahead. And don't try to sue us if you sustain damage or injury. Make sure you're off the planet in 2 standard hours. Odo felt his shoulder muscles relax. He hadn't realized he'd tensed them. Magito understood. He closed the link. Scarata winked at him and grinned. Calbia was proud of him, and it made him feel as safe and confident now as it had when he was a small child. It's amazing how rarely you need to use force, he said, relieved. Without the coordinates from Delta, Odo knew he wouldn't have known where to start the search for Val. Magito's surface was a windswept icescape, dazzlingly pretty for a few minutes, and then fatally disorienting. Odo set Ayahan down between cliffs, on the edge of the underground lake, and sealed his armor. And as he opened the hatch, the wind shrieked and howled. He slid off the hull, and Scarata dropped down beside him. He's been out here for 4 hours, Calbia. Odo activated his helmet's infrared filter, adjusted it to its most sensitive setting, and cast around on a square search of a 20-meter grid. If he's dead, I might still pick up a temperature differential, but it's unlikely. Scarata paced the imaginary grid with slow, silent deliberation, sweeping a handheld scanner across the surface to locate holes and fissures, and then scanning for temperature changes. Odo suddenly wondered if he'd been tactless, and that Calbia might be upset at the thought of Val being dead. The two men had been at each other's throats ever since he could remember, but they also went back a long time, including all those years training clones on Commando. Erased from the galaxy and dead to all who knew them. I'm sorry, Bia, he said. Don't be. Scarata checked a readout on his forearm plate. I'm scanning for metals. This detects 20 meters down. Scarata might have been genuinely unmoved, interested only in the proceeds of the robbery. For once, Ordo couldn't tell, but he doubted it. Scarata felt everything on raw nerves. They paced slowly, leaning against the wind, and Scarata seemed to be cycling through his comlink frequencies, because Ordo was picking up spikes on his system. Bao might have left a link open. It was worth trying. No paw prints, Scarata said. Winds probably swept them away. Ordo switched from infrared to the penetrating sensor. It was like checking in mail slots, a tedious progression from one hole to the next. A recent fall of snow was drifting, filling in the depressions. He could be anywhere. He might even have got out and found shelter. Scarata tilted his head down as if listening. Ordo caught a burst of audio on the shared comlink. If he is, his helmet systems are down. I'm getting static. He might be down too deep. Ordo was starting to feel the cold seeping through his armor joints. If this had been his GAR-issue suit, he'd have had temperature control. But his Mandalorian Beskar gear was more basic. He'd fix that as soon as he got the chance. Just like he'd upgraded his helmet. It wasn't as if he spent a lot of time working in it. He'd never thought to check how Val's suit was configured. It was just matte black, an image he dreaded as a kid. And now, unsettlingly like Omega's Catan rig, black was the color of justice. Calabia's armor was sand gold, the color of vengeance. Ordo had opted for deep red plates, simply because he liked the color. But black or gold, if Val didn't have cold proofing or some other protection, he'd be dead now. Don't laugh, son, Scarata said. But I'm going to try something old-fashioned. Just like you talked your way past the picket. He stood with his arms at his sides and yelled, Murd, Murd. You dribbling heap, can you hear me? The wind was drowning out his voice. He clenched his fist and tried again, Murd. Ordo joined in calling the Striddle's name. He almost expected to see a patrol closing in on them, but his helmet's senses showed nothing. Striddles can stand cold, Scarata said, pausing to get his breath. And they've got better hearing than humans. It was worth a try. He tapped his forearm controls, adjusting his helmet's voice projector to maximum. Murd. How would they even hear the animal if it responded to their calls? Ordo was about to go back and start using the ship's sensor systems to probe deeper into the ice. But he heard Scarata say, Osikia, in surprise, and when he turned, the snow was shaking. The thin crust broke. A gold-furred head pushed through the like a hideously ugly seedling, a thick layer of white frost on its muzzle. Murd. I'll never cuss you again, Scarletta said, and knelt down to scoop away the chunks of ice. The animal whined pitifully. Is he down there, Murd? Is Val down there? He hesitated, and then rubbed the folds of loose skin on its muzzle. Map the tunnel for me, Ortica. The holochart hung in the air, a 3D model of the ice beneath them. The tunnel that Murd had struggled out of ran down at a 30-degree angle and curved close to the margin of the lake, before sneaking away again and disappearing off the chart in the direction of Jagat. It's about 60 meters down to the bend, and the diameter there is only a meter, Odo said. If he fell, chances are he came to rest at the bend. Long way down, Scarletta had his arms around Murd, and Odo wasn't sure if he was hugging the animal or trying to shelter it. It was a marked change of attitude, given that he'd thrown his knife at it more than once in the past. Murd, find Val. Good, Murd. Here. He took out a length of fiber cord from his belt and knotted it around Murd's neck. Go find him. You couldn't drag him out, could you? Is he stuck? Find him. Murd struggled back down the tunnel, making rasping noises with his claws like a skater. And then there was silence again. Murd's clever, but a shrill can't tie knots, said Ordo. So, if Val's dead or unconscious, what are you doing? Measuring, said Scarletta. He had a tight grip on the line, watching it intently. Eventually it went taut. Fair feck. There's never a Jedi around when you need one, is there? Buttercup could have done his Force stuff and located Val right away. He tugged on the line. Back, Murd. Come back. The line went slack again. Given how much line I'm holding, minus the loop, Val's at 58 meters. If Murd reached him, it'd stay with Val. Trust me. It stopped where Val is when the line went taut. Now all we have to do is get to him. The solution was obvious to Ordo. We breached the tunnel at the thinnest point of the ice, which is where it runs next to the lake, and that's less than 8 meters thick, and fled the tunnel. No. Or flush him into the lake and lose him. Either way, he's dead. Either way, Ordo said, utterly relieved that he recalled every line of the Deepwater manual. I lined the ship up, starboard side too, and worked through the ice with the boarding tube from the airlock. Dry entry. Scarletta looked up at him for a moment. Ordo didn't need to see his face to know what he was thinking. You still manage to amaze me, son. You really do. Just hope we don't hit rock. Murd crawled out of the tunnel and flopped at Scarletta's feet, panting. It was a struggle to get the shrill into Ayahan, probably because it thought they were leaving Val behind. but it was weak and frozen, and that meant Scarata and Odo could subdue it between them. Odo set the ship down on the frozen surface of the lake. If the ice cracked and they fell through, that was fine, because it would save him the trouble of smashing through. But it didn't. Shields. What did it say about shields when diving? Reconfigure. He tapped in the commands and waited. Amber indicators changed one by one to green. Okay, now avoid any serious impacts. Odo lifted Aehan clear of the surface, climbed steeply and fired a laser round at the lake at what he hoped was a safe distance from the ice wall. Steam plumed up beneath him like a geyser. A chunk of ice lifted vertically and bobbed for a second before sliding back again. The lake would freeze over fast. Brace for dive, he said, and took her in a slow nosedive. Oh, sick. Oh, yes. Do other people live their lives like this? Do they take these kinds of risks? It wasn't the time to worry about that. Odo hadn't yet met a problem he couldn't solve, or a situation he couldn't survive. Aehan pushed through the shadowed surface, and even at low speed it seemed like crashing into solid rock. For a moment, Odo thought he'd got it badly wrong. But the slow ice impact wasn't anywhere near as violent as weapons fire, and the shield held. Chunks scraped and screeched as she passed through the slush layer, and then everything went quiet in clear twilight water. They were in the lake itself. Now he had to align the airlock with Vow's position. You knew the hull would take that, right, Ordica? Scarata jumped out of the co-pilot's seat and pulled off his helmet. He looked shaken. Of course I did. Well, 90% sure. Okay, close enough. Let's do some scanning. The airlock was nearly 2 meters in diameter. Odo aligned it at Vow's rough position and used the penetrating sensors to look for a dense mass. Scarata went into the starboard cargo bay with his metal scanner and opened the inner airlock hatch. The warning light lit up on the console, and Scarata's voice crackled over the ship's intercom. Big immobile jump of Durasteel and Beskar about 6 meters in, he said. Good old Midlothian iron. You can't beat the stuff. That's Vow, all right. 6 meters. That was a pretty thin wall between the tunnel and the water. At least there was no worm activity. But there was no way of knowing if the shock wave from the laser round would attract them. Let me reposition. I'm a meter off. I can't tell if he's alive. Okay. We've got to cut through that ice now. Heat it, Scarata said. We can vent the melt water through the tanks. About 80 cubic meters, maybe less. Okay. Odo hiked the thermostat on the environmental controls. They needed to raise the temperature of the exposed ice on the other side of the airlock any way they could. Maybe a combination of heat and cutting. and Magito TC wants us out of here in about an hour and a half. Oda extends the outer docking ring until he felt it emmed in the lake wall. Come out of the airlock, Calbia. I need to test for leaks. Claire. I'm going to see what we've got in the tool locker. Okay. Closing inner airlock. The status light changed to green again. He put Ayarhan on auto helm to hold her steady against the ice wall. Opening outer hatch. The sensors showed no leaks. When Oda maneuvered the safety cam inside the airlock chamber, he saw a smooth, glassy disk of dirty ice. A few meters on the other side of that lay Waylon Vow. If they got it wrong, while they tried to cut through the wall, the water would flood in and sink Ayahan. It was a lot of trouble to go for a few credits, and a man both of them disliked. On too many occasions, Oda had wished Vow dead. Now he found himself willing the Chakar to stay alive. Special Operations Brigade, HQ, Coruscant, General Organze's office, 471 days after Geonosis. Sev thought it was just as well he had a reputation for being uncommunicative. General Zay walked up and down the short line of 4 commandos, as if he was doing an inspection, pausing occasionally to stare at a detail of their armor or look into the eyes. If the Jedi thought that would psych out Delta Squad, he'd have a long walk ahead of him. Sev stared straight ahead, hands clasped behind his back, boots planted firmly at shoulder width. In his peripheral vision, General Jusek sat on a table, swinging his legs. His disheveled Padawan image didn't fool anyone. Sev had been on enough operations with him to know that he could make Scorch look overcautious. Zay's ARC Trooper aide, Captain Mays, prowled the room as if he wasn't listening to the debriefing. On balance, Sev preferred the Null Arcs. They understood in a way that the men trained by Fett simply didn't. Zay came to a halt in front of Boss, and stood with his nose almost touching his. "I'm not stupid," he said quietly. "Am I, Sergeant?" "Sir, no, sir," Boss barked. "Want to tell me what went wrong with your exfiltration?" "Sir, we encountered some resistance and were forced to exit the complex via an unreconnoitered passage, sir." Sev felt for Boss. They'd all made the decision to stick with Vow, but Boss was the boss. So he got it in the neck. Sev found the occasional trips back to HQ unsettling. He wanted to be back out in the field with just his brothers for company, because Coruscant wasn't their world, and he'd already had enough of it. Zay was still in the boss's face. "This wouldn't have anything to do with Scarata, would it, 3-8? "Sir, no, sir." Well, that much was true. Nobody had actually lied to Zay yet. because Jedi had a way of telling if someone was lying. Zay took a pace back, seemed to be suppressing a smile, and then shook his head. "Well," he said at last, sitting down behind his fancy lapis-inlaid desk. "Good result on Magito. General Kiadi Mundi has sent his commendation. Don't care. What's happened to Sergeant Val?" "Can we eat it, sir?" Scorch asked, straight-faced. "I realize you returned with indecent haste, Delta." Zay turned to Maze. "Captain, once I'm through with this briefing, take Delta straight to the mess and stand over them while they eat the recommended daily intake." Mace looked less than thrilled by his nursemaid duties, grunted. "Sir." Jusik, who'd been staring out the window, suddenly flinched, as if someone unseen had walked up behind him. Jedi were weird. "But before you eat, gentlemen, here's your new brief." Zay flicked a holoshot into life, and the familiar planet-studded grid settled in the air over the briefing table. "And this comes straight from the Chancellor. A direct personal order. Find Chief Scientist Kosai." Boss was still doing the talking, which suited Sev just fine, because he was far more interested in Val's fate and was now watching Jusik carefully. The kid was like a hollow receiver. He picked up all kinds of stuff from distant events. Maybe he'd detected something now. He certainly looked distracted. "And when we find her, sir, bring her back in one piece." "Bummer," Fixer muttered. "Sir." Zay managed a smile. "I know you have little to love the Kaminoans for, gentlemen, but I don't make the rules. Lama Su is adamant that Kosai defected and that she didn't die. He won't give his reasons, but that probably doesn't matter, because the Chancellor wants a tame Kaminoan scientist for our own use, so we aren't beholden to Tipoca, should they ever change their minds about our favored customer status." The general shook his head as if he was arguing with himself. "So, haul her back here. Top priority. He ordered me to put the best team on it." Sev accepted that it was true. They were better than Omega, because they didn't go soft and get diverted by personal issues. They had Val to thank for that. "She's been gone a year, sir. Why make the move so late in the day?" Boss asked. "I'm not privy to that information, Sergeant," Zay said carefully, "but the intel we do have, via the Kaminoans, suggests that she's passed through Vinai within the last 6 months." Sev didn't know the Kaminoans had any kind of intelligence, seeing as they almost never left their homeworld, but they could clearly buy it in from outside. He chalked Kosai up to the long list of objectives that Delta had been set and tried to come to terms with his fears about Val. Boss broke position and wandered over to the hollow-shot to locate Vinay. Who's tracking her, sir? You. Understood. The report came from Reen, who do occasional work for the Republic. She's probably long gone, but this is the first positive lead we've had. Sev sneaked a look at Jusek. Something had definitely distracted him, and it wasn't what was happening on the parade ground. The Jedi looked at him and gave him a discreet thumbs up. What does that mean? Cheer up. His grav ball team won. Val's okay. Boss, Scorch, and Fixer were engrossed in the discussion on the significance of Vinay. Plenty of ocean, and she wasn't likely to be hiding out on Tatooine. And Sev just stood there, eyes pointing in the appropriate direction to look, like he was following the debate. Fear. Yes, it was fear. Everyone got scared, but this was different. A gnawing, hollow void in his stomach. He'd let Val down when it mattered. If Val survived, he'd beat Sev within a breath of his life. If he didn't, he'd haunt him. Try harder, Sev. You let your brothers down. You let me down. You let the whole Shabla army down. Try harder, you lazy little chakar, or next time it really will hurt. Sev had tried so hard that he collapsed on his bunk most nights, without even getting his fatigues off, and then had to catch up on his laundry in the early hours when reveal made his heart nearly leap out of his chest, and he got up with his head still buzzing with lack of sleep. He was 5 years old. He hadn't forgotten. Zev was now the best sniper in the Grand Army because he didn't want to let anyone down. And this stays within this room, gentlemen, because this is the Chancellor's pet peeve. Zay's tone jerked, Sev back to the present. Nobody else in Special Operations knows about this, and I really don't want Skarata to know, because, fine man though he might be, he does have an issue with Kaminorans. Any man who refers to them as Tatsushi and actually boasts of recipes is probably best kept out of the loop. Dismissed. Scorch chuckled approvingly as they clunked their way down the corridor towards the mess with Maz at their heels. You think Skarata would really eat a Kaminoran? Vixen managed to a sentence, which was good going for him. Only if he had hot sauce. What do you think they serve us that isn't roll of fish on the menu? Scorch half turned as he walked, trying to drag Sev into the conversation. You okay, Sev? Terrific. They couldn't mention Val in front of Maze, as far as Zay was concerned. Val had done the Magito Reese and banged out. He certainly hadn't robbed a bank and plunged down some ice hole to freeze to death. If he hadn't already broken his neck, never better. The sound of boots walking briskly down the corridor behind them broke into a clatter. Jusik caught up, looking flushed and almost pleased with himself. I'll keep this lot in line, Captain, he said to Maze. I'm sure you've got better things to do than make them finish their greens. Maze turned on his heel immediately and began walking back to the command center. Whatever it is you're doing, he said, thank you for not involving me in it, sir. Maze wasn't stupid. He didn't want to stand between two Jedi generals playing a game. Nobody in their right mind would. Boss stood back to let Jusik enter the mess first. Well, General, I feel that Val is alive. And we left him behind, Sev said. We don't do that. Jusik took Sev's arm discreetly and applied a little pressure. And you were out of options, Private. If he'd wanted extracting, he'd have asked. Squatch grabbed a plate of seed breads and slapped them on a table to mark his territory. Few of the other commandos sat near Delta at mealtimes, because they were one of the last complete squads who'd been decanted together in Tepoka City, and stayed together this far. Heavy casualties in the early days of the war. Sev hated himself for believing all that guff about Jedi being invincible military geniuses. Meant that most commando squads had been reformed at least once, and just didn't have that extra cohesion that Delta did. Sev was sure. All but one of Val's squads had stayed in one piece. He might have been a savage instructor, but it was all for their own good. He said so. It was true. So what now, sir? Boss asked. How do we make this disappear? The voice traffic with Skarata. Don't kid yourself that Zay doesn't know something went on. Jusik could switch from being a goofy kid to a hard man in an instant. He seemed to be learning a lot from Skarata. He has to at least pretend to stick to the rules. Leave it to me. Those comlink records will vanish before anyone knows they exist. Thank you, sir. You made the right call to pass the problem to me instead of Zay, Jusik said. You might feel disloyal, but what he doesn't officially know can't get him in trouble. Will you let us know when they find him? Of course I will. If anyone can extract him, Kalbira and Orica can. Jusik grabbed a seed bread from Scorch's plate and got up to leave. The Force tells me things will work out. Sev watched him go. If the Force was that chatty, it should have been telling the Jedi about useful strategic stuff, not vague fortune-telling. Kalbia, Fixer mocked. Boss didn't seem too upset about Vow to eat. Wow, he's got it bad, little Jusik, hasn't he? Regular little Mender Aid. Hey, our Sarge is missing. Sev clenched his teeth to keep his voice as low as he could. Val could be dead, and you can eat and joke. We abandoned him. We left him to die. We never leave a man behind, guys. The other three stared at him like he was telling them something they didn't know. Take it easy, Sev. We are all worried. Best thing we can do, Scott said, is do our job and let everyone else do theirs. You get that gem of wisdom off a ration pack label? Sev snapped. Shut up and eat. You'll think straighter on a full stomach and a few hours sleep. Scorch grabbed a passing server droid. Full curry breakfast for the young psychopath here, Tinny. Sev ate too fast to taste the food, but at least it filled a hole, as Fi would have said it if the annoying little jerk had been here. Sev wasn't sure if he missed Omega or not. On balance, he did. And it was all for a few credits. There weren't enough credits in the galaxy to make it worth leaving a comrade behind. Sev could imagine nothing more worse. If he ever saw Val alive again, he wondered if he'd have the guts to apologize to him. Magito, Deepwater Submersible Ayahan, depth 58 meters. 471 days at the Geonosis. Scarata wasn't sure if the fluid dripping off his nose and chin was spray from the melting ice or its own sweat. They'd been hacking at the ice face for an hour now, and the space was too confined for both of them to work at the same time. They took turns. Scarata found he needed it. It was hot, damp, and numbing labor. Melting was useless. It seemed to be freezing again as fast as it thawed. He put his full weight against an inadequate hydro cutter and took another chunk of ice out of what he saw as a 6-meter tunnel. His hands were numb and tingling from the vibration. I'm getting too old for this. Vow. Why the shab are we even bothering? I put my boy at risk for this. Odo tapped him on the shoulder. Break, Calbia. Scarata put the cutter on standby and found he could hardly move his legs. Odo, with that perfect silent understanding, grabbed him by his boots and hauled him out of the airlock tube. Scarata leaned against the bulkhead and then slid down in it in exhaustion. His hands felt lifeless. He shook them hard to stop the tingling. It wasn't the time to say that they could have left Val. They were both at the stage where they couldn't think of much beyond the next minute, and the next chunk of ice, pulled free and pushed out onto the deck. The cargo bay deck was scattered with red gravel, freed by the melt. The pristine white landscape disguised how much debris there was in the compressed snow. There was another thunk from the airlock, like a brick falling off a wall. Scarata struggled to his feet and stepped in to clear the ice out of Odo's way. Even the noise of the cutting disc couldn't drown out Murd's whining and yelping, and he wondered if the Strill would claw clean through the hatch to get out of the locked storage compartment. Even if nobody else loved Val, that animal certainly did. The good thing about repetitive and desperate physical labor was that it stopped you from speculating too much on things like the ice that had refrozen across the lake, the possibility that the lake wall would collapse under the weight of their water anyway, and that, working now without their sealed armor, they'd drown if the boarding tube gave way. Clunk. Odo was young, strong, and fit. He was removing the ice a lot faster than Scarata could. Rewarming, Odo yelled. Scarata was partially deaf from too much time spent around loud explosions without a helmet. But he could hear him. When we get Val out, he's bound to have hypothermia. However good his armor is, got to get him thawed. What? Rescue breathing, warm air in the lungs, mouth to mouth. Scarata wasn't thinking fast enough. Oh, sick. Maybe mud can do it. The one thing they had plenty of now was hot water. The tanks were full. Val could at least have warm compresses, warm sugar water. Odo grunted with effort, and there was another clunk. He was going well. It's all about raising core temperature. Scarata broke out his ration pack. He never imagined he'd give Well and Val his last energy blocks. Here he was, worrying about the Chakar, who'd beat his men badly enough to put them in a meta center. When he had his boys, Jusik, a pregnant Etain, and now Bessani Renan to fret over. And they all deserve his efforts a lot more than Val. Chakar, he said to himself. A cryodroid might be a good investment. What? I said, I think a cryodroid might be a good investment. Ice breaking. The drill drowned Odo's voice for a while. Should be able to melt ice faster than this. It was a long half hour. The brief spells at the ice face were getting harder each time, and they needed to save their energy blocks for Val. Scarata felt his strength ebbing faster. The gravel release from the ice dug into the palms of his hands when he crawled into the tube. But they were so numb now, he could hardly feel it. Eventually, he resorted to his blaster, and the steam made the compartment feel like a Senna steamer. Odo checked the thickness of the ice. Nearly there. At least it's warm in here. I'm sorry, son, getting you into this. Good training. Never done this before. You should be out on the town with your girl at your age, not... I don't feel right about using Bessani to spy for us. It was right out of the blue. Odo did that from time to time, revealing what was on his mind and making Scarata realize he didn't know everything about him, not even now. He must have been chewing it over while he slogged away at the ice. Morel didn't force her, son. She knows the score. I meant that I wasn't expecting to feel bad about it. So again, Scarata knew even less about Odo than he thought. He decided not to comment and just let the lad ramble on. But Odo went quiet again, and more lumps of dirty, gritty ice fell out onto the deck as the cutter whined. He had to say, "The Republic uses you, son. But now we are using the Republic. Can't let an asset like Bessani Renan go to race." A breath of burning cold air on his face, and a shout from Odo snapped Scarata out of an exhausted trance. And somehow his adrenaline got him back on his feet. "We're through. I see him." There wasn't enough room for both of them in the tube. Odo hacked frantically at the rapidly enlarging hole. When he leaned back to reach for a fiber cord line, Scarata could see a black shape that didn't look like a man for a moment. But then he could make out part of the T-shaped visor of Val's helmet. I'm cutting his packs free. The operation was now more like delivering a nerf calf. As after much swirling and panting, Odo backed out of the boring tube, hauling Val by a line around one shoulder. It sounded like he was dragging a coffin. Val plopped onto the cargo bay deck in a heap, his armor so cold that it burned Scarata's fingers as he eased off the man's helmet. Val's hard, gaunt face was almost blue. Scarata pushed his eyelids back to check his pupils. They reacted to the light. Humans survived low temperatures even when they looked dead, and Val was definitely alive. Scarata mentally listed all the procedures he had to follow, like looking for a pulse, counting breaths, not rubbing extremities, and diverting warmer blood from the core. Osik, Weylan, you Chabrier, don't you dare go and die on me now. Val's head whirled, and he mumbled back at Scarata. Murd, he said, murd. Scarata had gone after Val at least twice in his life, fully intending to kill him. His instinct, funny thing, that it was now focused him totally on saving the man. Odo slithered backward out of the tube again, dragging Val's brigand and a large bundle of plastoid sheeting that chinked and clacked. Rescue breathing, Calbia, he panted. The effort had even taken its toll on Ordo. He grabbed Val and half-dragged, half-carried him into the medbay, heaving him onto the bunk. Scarata trailed behind with the bags. I know your cousin can generate a few kilowatts of heat, but it's not reaching his lungs. He's conscious and breathing. No CPR. Okay, dry. He's dry. Wet clothing leashed the heat fast. The suit held up. Scarata pulled off Val's armor and grabbed whatever he could find from the locker to wrap him up. His fingers showed no signs of frostbite. Corpse cold, but still soft. That was something. Let Murd out. Murd shot out of the store compartment and nearly knocked Scarata over. The animal was good and warm. If anyone was going to snuggle up to Val and transfer heat, Murd was the best choice. Ordo watched the strill flop onto its master with delighted little squeals and rumbles, slobbering over his face. Ordo seemed to find it suddenly funny. Thanks, Murd, he said. You saved us both from a fate worse than death. Carry on that strill. He turned to Scarata. It's time to seal up and get out of here. How are you going to break the surface ice? Ordo shrugged. Torpedo? Well, the laser didn't attract any unwelcome attention, so go for it, son. I'll get some hot liquid into Val. Secure him in the bunk. because we are going to be banging out of here at quite an angle. You might want to hold off the hot liquid until we are stable again. Odo never exaggerated. When he said quite an angle, he probably meant vertical. A few moments after the shock of an exploding torpedo bounced back at them, everything they hadn't had time to stow securely went sliding to the bulkhead, and Murd howled, claws nailed deep into the bunk housing. Ayan leveled out. The loose objects thudded back down on the deck. "Drink this," Karata said, lifting Val's head with one hand and holding a beaker of the cube sweetened hot water to his lips. Mud gave Karata some grudging space, but spread itself down the length of Val's frame. "Get it in your gut, Wallon, or I'll have to heat your innards by shoving a blaster down your throat." Val coughed, splashing a fine spray of spit in Skarata's face. "I'm going to tell everyone what a soft chakar you are, Cal." Well, his cognitive functions were just fine. No confused rambling there. Skarata ticked one more symptom off the first aid list. "Can you feel any injuries?" "Not yet." "You look worse than me." "Come on," Skarata slopped more liquid into his mouth. He felt wrecked now. "Get this down, you." "Tell Delta." "Okay, yes." Val had a few saving graces. He knew his lads would be worried sick about him, and that they needed to know he'd been extracted. "Will do. Now, what the Shab was worth nearly freezing to death for." "What the Shab," Val said hoarsely, "was worth nearly killing yourself to save me." "I wanted your armor. Better environment seals than mine, obviously. You could survive a Sarlacc in that." Val actually smiled. He didn't do that often. He had very even white teeth that proved he'd had a healthy and well-fed early childhood. Began. "Take a look inside." Odo's voice cut into the ship's comlink system. "I'm heading for the RV point, Calbia. I've informed General Jusik that Val's inboard." "Good lad," said Skarata. "Good lad," Val chorused. "How much did this sub cost you?" "Shut up and drink." Skarata waited until he'd forced 3 beakers of diluted energy cubes down Val's throat before giving in to an animal curiosity that overrode every weary ache and pulled muscle. He untied the bundle as the contents spilled across the medbay deck. There was only one word he could spit out. "Wahi." Val made a coughing sound that might have been laughter. He didn't get a lot of practice at that. Skarata was transfixed by the tide of valuables, so much so that his hands were shaking when he unfastened the backpack's assortment of pouches. What spilled out stifled any further comment. He knelt down on the deck, knowing his old ankle injury was screaming for a painkiller, but far too engrossed in sorting through the booty to give it any time. There was a lot here. A lot. Hundreds of thousands of credits worth. He stretched out his hand and rummaged cautiously. No, millions. Scarata started making a mental inventory almost without thinking about it. Old habits died hard. When he glanced over his shoulder, Val was watching him, eyes half open as if he was nodding off. Mud kept guard, snuffling occasionally. Except for the inside pocket, he said. You can keep the lot. What do you mean, keep the lot? I'm not a thief. I took what was rightfully mine. The rest is a donation to your clone welfare fund. Well on, Scarta said quietly. This is something like 40 million creds, at least. Stunned or not, he could always compose himself enough to carry out a blisteringly accurate valuation. You nearly died to get it. You sure about this? You're still in shock, you. Sure. You liberated it for the lads, Waylon. That's... I liberated it to cover my shebs, Val said. Scarata nodded, suddenly unable to meet Val's eyes any longer. Of course you did. If the only items missing are from the Val deposit box, then it narrows down the suspects. Val reached out for the beaker and managed to get it to his lips. He spilled a lot of it, but that was okay. He was recovering fast. Just made it look like good old-fashioned random thieving. Your dad couldn't touch you even if he did work out that you'd come back. It was clearly one admission too far for Val. He was definitely embarrassed, not angry. Look, Cal, when you were surviving on dead burats and gravel and playing the working class martyr, did nobody teach you how to steal like a professional? Val usually didn't have to do much to get Scarata fighting mad. Breathing was normally enough. This time, Scarata simply knelt there, with his chin lowered, struggling to find the right words to tell Val. He was moved by his generosity. Thanks, he said, fidgeting with a spectral arodium ingot. Thanks, Navad. He'd never called Val brother without a good dose of sarcasm. 40 million creds went a long way with Scarata. But remember my men too, Cal. If they need help when the time comes, I expect it to be given. Well on. This is for every clone who needs help, not just my lads. I'd buy out all 3 million of them if I could. As long as we understand each other. I'll get Ordo to inventory this. He's good at that. They didn't have a crumb of food on board, but they were rich. Or at least Scarata rapidly expanding plans to secure the future for clones. His clones. Val's clones. Any Shabla clone he could get out of the Gar in the end. We're well funded. Ordo sat at the treatment table in the medbay with Scarata and worked his way through the hall with a datapad and a distracted frown. Is this some Mandalorian renaissance you're planning, Cal? Val asked. It was starting to feel like it. He hadn't really thought that far ahead. If I set up a place for them all, then it might as well be Mandalore. Yeah, Val said. It might as well. Mud draped over Val like a badly made fur coat. Watched Odo with one red-rimmed eye. The other was shut tight. Odo had never forgotten that Val had set Mud on him as a kid, and it seemed that Mud hadn't forgotten that Odo had aimed a blaster between its eyes. It rumbled deep in its throat. Apparently reassured that both Odo's hands were occupied with the proceeds of the robbery. Odo took a spectral analyzer from his belt toolkit and ran the beam over the gems, diligently noting the composition and weight of each piece in his datapad, with a little frown of concentration like some heavily armed accountant. Scarrato held his breath. Some of the items in the bag were priceless antiques. Beshavo ancestral icon, Odo said, and held up a time-stained square of gilded parchment. Collectors would happily shoot their mothers for it. They certainly shot each other. I hope you know a reliable offense in the fine art world, Calbiera, because we're going to need one. The fine arts? Scarza said, fighting a hysterical urge to giggle. All my natural territory. You're an uncultured savage, said Val. But you did save my shebs. Here, Odo. Help me with my belt. Odo raised an eyebrow. You ought to be taking it easy, Sergeant. Open this pouch. Come on. Scarza did it for him. Val fumbled and pulled out a piece of jewelry. A gold pin with 3 square-cut, vivid blue stones of extravagant size set along its length. He could have swapped it for a penthouse apartment in the Republica. Scarza had never seen anything like it. My mother's bauble, Val said. He tossed it to Odo, who caught it one-handed. Give it to that pretty girl of yours, Captain. She'll do it justice. Odo, always an odd mix of naivete and precocious experience, stared at it with visible dismay. He had no idea how to accept a gift like that. But then neither did Scarata. It was a showstopper. The only people who'd given him assets even remotely like it had done so at the point of his knife. Bao seemed utterly unmoved by wealth. But maybe if you started life that rich, then it ceased to have meaning. Odo scanned the stones. Dimensions, clarity, refractions, density, and tapped the datapad. Approximately 143 carats. His gaze was still fixed on the sapphires, as if they were going to explode. Current market value of the unset gems is 10 million. But it's your inheritance. He sounded like a little boy. Again. And the fact that it was stolen property didn't enter into the objection. It's too valuable, I'm afraid. Take it, Odo. It gives me great pleasure to know that Mavau no longer has it, and that a better woman does. It may simply have been embarrassed bluster, but Scarata felt the depriving his loathed parents of something was exactly what Val wanted. He was a volunteer orphan. It was in stark contrast with Scarata, an orphan who valued family more than anything. He tried to be the best possible father to men who'd been created without the comfort of any mother at all, good or bad. Odo as ever educated Scarata again. The lad was full of surprises. "It's very gracious of you, Sergeant Val," he said, and put the pin carefully in his undershirt pocket. He could be quite the gentleman, just as Scarata had taught him. "Thank you. I assure you it'll be treasured." It took another hour to tally all the items, and some still defied valuation. Even so, Scarata was now looking at 53.5 million credits. If you didn't count Odo's Chironi sapphires, half of it in unregistered secured bonds that could be converted to credits anywhere, while Val slept and Odo piloted the ship. Scarata admired the hull for a while, imagining all the safe houses, escape routes, and new beginnings it could buy for clones who decided they'd completed their service to the Republic. He wasn't encouraging desertion. He was liberating slaves. Men who didn't sign up had no oath or contract to honor, as far as he was concerned. Eventually, he left Val to sleep, curled in a fetal ball with Murd, still keeping vigil over him, and wandered off to the cockpit to sit with Odo. Odo held out the jeweled pin. "Look, they turn green in this light." He seemed more fascinated by the chemistry of them. "What am I going to do with them, Calbia?" Scarata shrugged. "Like Val says, give them to Bessany. They're stolen. That compromises her. Let me think of something. They'd buy a lot of land in a secure base. Will Val be offended? Not as long as Mahaval doesn't get to wear them again. How terrible to hate your parents so much. But then parents do appalling things to their children, don't they? Like poor Tane. Giving away to total strangers. Odo pitied Jedi. It was becoming a recurring theme in his conversation. "I'm lucky to find a father who wanted me. We all are. Does he think I was a bad father to my own kids? He never says." "I'd kill for you, son," Scarta said. "It's that simple." Odo was a good lad. A wonderful lad. He could pilot a totally unfamiliar ship, even stage a staggering rescue, just on intuition, and one skim of the manual, then sit down and balance the accounts. Scarata, choked silent by pride and overwhelming paternal love, leaned over the pilot's seat and gave him a hug. Odo winked, clearly pleased with himself, and gripped Scarata's arm. Fatherhood was a blessing. It would be a blessing for Darman when the time came for him to find out, and now Scarata had both wealth and the prospect of Kosai's technology to guarantee a decent future for all of them. But the future was a fragile concept for Mandalorians. Tomorrow was never taken for granted by soldiers, and the Mandore word for it, Venkyot, conveyed optimism rather than a timescale. Venku was a good, positive Mandalorian name for any son. It would fit Daman and Etane's baby very well indeed. Yes, Venku. That's it, Venku. I never adopted you formally, Scarlett said. It had been bothering him in recent days, ever since he began to think of the war as having a definite time scale. Any of you. Does that matter? Scarlett now felt that it did. No Mander Ed would nitpick over the bond between him and his boys. And as far as the Republic was concerned, clones didn't even qualify as people. But his plans to give them a decent future had now become very, very specific. That discovery of Lama Su's terse message to Palpatine just over a week ago had fast-forwarded everything. Yes, he said. He reached to grasp Odo's hand, and we sighted the short, no-frills Guy Bal Manda, name and soul. All it took to unpick history and give a child a new parentage. Mandalorians were habitual adopters. Bloodlines were just medical detail. Ni Kirtel Gai Sayed Ordo. Odo stared at their clasped hands for a moment. He had a crushing grip. I've been your son since the day you first saved my life, Bia. I think you boys did the saving, Scarlett said. I don't want to imagine where I'd be without you. Scarlett was now busy hating himself for not doing this before, not making the ultimate commitment, and he fretted about his 5 other gnolls, scattered around the galaxy. Sometimes he saw them again, as 2-year-olds, waiting to be killed, because they didn't meet the spec the Kaminoans wanted. Uncommandable, disturbed, defective. And Aritis thought Mandalorians were savages, did they? The galaxy was full of hypocrites. 4. Decree E49D139.41. All non-military cloning of sentient is prohibited, and military cloning is to be confined to Republic licensed facilities, such as those of the government of Commando, and any other designated by the Republic, now or at any time during the duration of the hostilities. This prohibition encompasses the supply of cloning equipment, the hiring of or contracting of cloning technologists, and genetic engineers for the purpose of carrying out cloning techniques, and the procurement of sentient cloned organisms. Exceptions. Cum Columbus and Arcania may continue therapeutic medical cloning with appropriate license on a case-by-case basis. Proceedings of the Senate Republic Legal Review. Gevtikar, the Road of Iyat, 473 days after Geonosis. So, what's your strategy? Daman asked the lizard. Trying to build relationships. How are you going to take over? Sergeant Cal said that you had to work with the locals and use their social structures to get the job done. Not try to get them to work the Republic's way. Aten ambled along beside Daman and the Merit, hands in his pockets, no telltale signs of his lightweight body armor under the workman's clothes. Eden had given him. It was raining, and the path through the trees was muddy and puddled, but at least they had an excuse to cover their heads with hoods. Aten had a visor and 2 days' growth of dark beard. On a cursory glance, few would spot that they were identical. "We crush Iyat," the lizard said. Her name was Sebs, and she had a frill of scarlet skin under her chin. Apparently, a sign that she was dominant and wouldn't take any backtalk from lesser lizards. She smelled of crushed leaves and carried a formidable sorrel shrub blaster slung across her chest. "We concentrate our efforts on the capital, and when that falls, the regional governments can't hold out, and we take the next tier of cities, and then the next smaller ones, and so on. We have numbers on our side. I think our chancellor could do with listening to you," Aten said, more to himself than to her. "He likes to start everywhere at once, so nobody feels left out of the war." "That's how we build by cascade process," said Sebes. "We can also unbuild the same way." Her tail swished from side to side to keep her balance as she walked. The whoosh, whoosh, whoosh and the current of air were noticeable. "Can you sneak up on people?" Damian asked. Seb stopped swinging her tail, and her gait became slightly more lateral. But she was now moving silently. "Yes." "So you built the cities here?" "Yes, the hired help." "But you don't get a say in government." "We didn't get paid as much as humans. We can't live in the nice homes we built. If having a say means changing that, then yes. We want a say in government. Your other comrade in the scut was very vexed about that. Before he disappeared." "The first arc?" "Yes. I can see how that would get Alpha 30 annoyed." "You understand you don't have any rights either, if you ask me. It's crazy to train an army and not keep it happy. It'll turn on you in the end." Aten coughed discreetly. "You speak very good basic. Always pays to speak the customer's language." She came to a sudden halt, motionless. Damian's instinct was to crouch and draw his sidearm. Aten did the same. Seb stared down at them, baffled. "What's up?" "You stopped dead," Damian whispered, missing his helmet sensors. "Enemy contact." "No, but this is as far as I go. Too close to the city, merit stands out. Heads we can cover, but the tails are a problem." She swung around and began walking back towards the camp. "Good luck." Reptilian species had that tendencies to freeze, and then burst into movement again. The guard manual said, knowing that didn't stop Damian from reacting every time. Aten watched Sebs go and turned to Damian again with a shrug. "Just an initial lease, and maybe vehicle acquisitions." "All right," he said. "Just assess the place. Just look around. I swear." Damian said he had fake ID credits, and the merits, excellent plans, of the city on his datapad. "Make sure nothing's changed since the last time the data was updated. See how far into the government complex we can get legitimately. The first thing that struck him about the city was that it was clearly defined. No gradual thickening of suburbs, no ribbon development. And if he hadn't been able to see the shapes of the perimeter buildings, he'd have thought it was a walled bastion. There was little traffic entering and leaving, and it was almost entirely made up of big vessels, repulsors trucks, and shuttles. The citizens of Yat didn't venture far afield. Siege in all but name, Aten said. They're scared of the merits. So, how do we explain that we walked in? Aten tapped his blaster. We're young, tough, and crazy. I'll buy that. And from out of town. Aiden could have mentioned it. We overflew the area. We should have thought of it. It'll be easier next time, once we've got a vehicle. Hire or buy. I thought of liberating a crate. But it's a small city, and they probably take speeder theft more seriously than on 000. Daw, you actually like thieving stuff, don't you? It's not stolen, Dahman said. It's differential procured. He didn't own anything. No clone did. Because everything the Kaminoans thought they needed had been provided for them. What he knew about property was learned from Sergeant Cal. And then the world of possession exploded on him when he was let loose in a galaxy where beings didn't just own things. They wanted lots of things. More than they could ever possibly use. And their entire existence was about acquiring more by any means they could. It was one thing to understand the theory, and another to feel it. Dahman was happy to have the best kits he could get, comfortable quarters, and as much food as he could eat, but nothing else material made him want to risk his life to get it. Do you ever wonder what happened to the 4 million creds that Sergeant Cal scammed out of the terrorists? Aten asked. They were at the limits of the woods now, yet had a skirt of open land around it. They were ready for the lizards. Do you think he handed it over to General Zay? No, Dahman said. I don't wonder. They finally broke cover and sauntered like a couple of ordinary, overconfident young men towards the main route into the city. The defense mentioned in the intel reports were now visible. Watchtowers with laser cannons and emplacements. The Merits had no air assets, apart from speeders, yet was set up to repel simple infantry assault. It wasn't expecting the Grand Army of the Republic. If it was, evidence of its separatist allies was nowhere to be seen. They had been walking in the open for a matter of minutes, when a repulsor truck looped off course and drew up alongside them. The driver leaned out of the cab, male human, middle-aged, dark, bearded. Are you nuts? He yelled. You can't walk outside the city. How did you get here? Dahman fell into the role effortlessly and shrugged. Had to dump the speeder bike kilometers back. Get in, he gestured to the rear of the truck. I'll drop you off inside the boundary. You're not local, are you? No. Looking for work. The driver opened the hatches and Atin scrambled in, giving Damin a hand up. Almost as soon as they'd found somewhere to sit among the crates of food board, the truck lurched to a halt. A fist banged on the bulkhead. Damin leaned out of the hatch and found they were inside Iyat, at an intersection with a speeder bus stationed on one corner of the quadrant. Off you go, and make sure you get transport back home, wherever that is, said the driver, and shook his head. Dumbest thing I ever saw. Thanks, Damin raved. The vehicle lifted off and disappeared across the intersection. Attica, this is just a test run. Let's see how far we get today. Atin consulted his datapad. The good thing about the rebels was that they'd built Iyat, and so they still had the plans, drainage and services channels, as well as the surface infrastructure. Speed a bus to the city center and pick up a city-registered airspeeder on the way out. Easier to get back in next time. It was, as Damin had decided from the bay of the core conveyor, an ordinary place where people got on with their lives. It was a small town, by comparison, with Coruscant all low-rise buildings and modest houses. He could grasp the scale. It didn't overwhelm him. He watched from the viewport of the speeder bus, head resting on the transparent steel, and saw human beings like himself. And I'm fighting for a different species, for lizards, against humans. Sergeant Cal says species doesn't matter to Mandalorians. Why doesn't the fact that I'm human matter to human beings on Coruscant? Damin knew of only one community where he felt at home, and that was with his brothers, and the few non-clones who had thrown in their lot with them. The rest of the galaxy was alien, regardless of species. Now he finally understood the concept of Aritis, Lok Shaptar. Atin nudged him in the ribs. This is our stop. He slipped his datapad back into his pocket. So far so good. Nothing changed as far as the layout goes. Well, their builders haven't shown up for a while, have they? No wonder nothing's changed. According to the plans, the government building, the assembly house, had a public gallery. Damin and Atin stood in front of the portico, admired the colonnade with appropriate out-of-town awe, and sheltered from the rain while they read the notice next to the huge pairs of doors. Session starts at 1400 then, Da. It's 10:40. Time to kill. It wasn't time wasted. They had time to wander around the block, plant a few bead-sized surveillance holocams outside the assembly house, and assess the point of entry for politicians attending parliamentary sessions. They took up positions in a tap cafe opposite the building and settled in to eat themselves to a standstill while watching the comings and goings of delivery vessels and official-looking speeders. Damin sat side on to the window. Atin faced outward to the road. I'm never eating meat again, Atin mumbled, staring at the trickle of traffic. Ever. What's that in your hand, then? Fish patty. Fish doesn't count. Reptile meat is a lot like fish. Aten looked down at the patty, sighed, put it back on the plate, and turned to summon a server droid. He seemed a lot happier when a pile of sweet pastries turned up. 2 hours to go. Domin tapped a few observations on exit routes into his datapad, chewing happily on a tube of pastry packed with minced roba and spices, and wondering when he might get a comlink window to contact Etain. Scarata was right. Focusing on the people you loved could keep you sane in a war, or distract you, and he thought he'd found the balance point. He had something to look forward to live for, even if he had no idea what would happen to the army when they won the war. We have to get Phi sorted out, Attica. Get him a date, you mean? Hasn't Lasima got a friend or something? I hate seeing him like this. Maybe Agent. Daman waited, distracted by his datapad. But Aten didn't finish. Agent what? Aten was staring at the traffic again, lips slightly parted. Don't look out the window. Just turn away slowly. Okay. Daman shifted position. He was starting to hate plainclothes ops. He longed for his helmet sensors yet again. What is it? Aten's lips barely moved. Daman strained to hear him. Over the noise in the tap calf, I thought I was looking at my own reflection for a second, until I remembered I'm in disguise, and I have scars. It took Daman a moment to work it out. Aten had seen another clone up close. He'd have recognized Phi, Nina, or Adin, and there weren't supposed to be any other troops here, except A-30, Sol. Sure it's not a null? Only ones I haven't met are Jang and Comric, and they're still after Grievous, says Cal. Whatever, that's not one of them. He was a meter from me. He's moving away now. Daman held his position for a little longer. Aten put his food down and made for the doors. Daman following. It wasn't what they'd come to yet to do, but an Ark who'd gone AWOL was impossible. Jango Fett had raised and trained them personally, with an emphasis on absolute loyalty to the Republic. Sergeant Cal said that Jango was an unhinged sabier, but he always stuck to his contract, and that contract had included creating a loyal, totally reliable army. Daman had heard rumors to the contrary, and the Knolls were living crazy proof that a clone soldier could be as eccentric and wayward as any random human. But nothing had ever been confirmed. See him, Attica. A broad back in the black leather coat vanished into a crowd of pedestrians. But a moment later, the Ark's ultra-short black crop bobbed up a little, above the heads of the crowd. Aten touched his fingers to his ear, activating the miniature comlink nestled deep inside. Sensors under his chin and on each side of the thyroid cartilage picked up the nerve impulses from his brain and converted silent sub-vocalizations to audible speech. It took a little practice to think in words and not speak aloud. But Daman now found it was just like talking to himself. Nina, change of plan, Aten said. Just eyeballed our MIA. Damin picked up Nina's voice on his earpiece. I've got your coordinates. Need backup? Let's see where he goes. Damin cut in. Check with Jusik. See if there's something we haven't been briefed on. Zay said MIA, Nina said. Unless this is a front for another mission. Aden's voice interrupted, with that gravelly indignance that mocked him out. If it is, then I don't know about it either. Damin didn't like the sound of that. There was need to know, and there was denying information, and not knowing where other special forces were placed, struck Damin as being the latter. And the Knolls always seemed to hear about everything, whether they were intended to or not. This would be easier on 000, Aten said. He's an Ark. It wouldn't be easy anywhere. Souls not missing, and seemingly at ease in Iyat, straggled down a tree-lined promenade, and dipped down a flight of steps. The two commandos quickened their pace. It was one thing tailing an ARC trooper. It was another thing entirely working out what to do once you caught up with him. Rendezvous Point, Mongtar Cantina, and Brasserie Bog 5. Bogdan System, 473 days after Geonosis. You're late, said Morel. We had to pick up groceries. Odo straddled the chair and rested his folded arms on the back, and Val had to stop off at the bank to get some creds. Next round's on him, then. Morel lounged in the seat, legs stretched out in front of him. It was a noisy, seedy cantina of the type that Morel seemed to enjoy. A droid and a young human male were at the table too, concentrating on the datapads. Nobody blinked at the presence of Mandalorians in a place like this. But the two strangers were in a world of their own anyway. So old Psycho's okay now. Where is he? Where's Calbia? Securing their Shosun, Ordo didn't want to spell out submarine in front of strangers. Mandora was almost unknown among Arutais, so it was a discreet code to use. Val and Murd are standing guard. Don't get agitated, but Boudica is planning to join us later. Ordo reserved the right to a little anxiety about General Jusik, who could swing in moments from a Jedi with ageless wisdom to a daredevil lunatic like Morel. Why? Something major he wants to discuss that he doesn't want to commit to voice traffic. He's as crazy as you. Zay's going to catch him one day. Ordo wondered for a moment if it was news of Etain and her pregnancy. But there were ways of passing that on discreetly, without the need to meet face to face. He indicated the droid with a jab of his thumb. Thought you'd seen enough tinnies for one lifetime. Just having a fascinating discourse about the expansion in the leisure economy with my colleagues here, who are TK0, said the droid, sitting to Morel's left. He looked like a taller, armored version of an R2 astromech. And my esteemed mechanic and agent, Gabe. Always a pleasure, said Gabe, not looking up from his datapad. But remember that without me, he's just fancy scrap. Odo switched over to his helmet comlink. Life was so much easier with a Bici. The apparent silence that followed for outsiders looked like two Mandos waiting for a comrade to show. And in their uncommunicative Mandalorian's way, not having much to discuss, by way of art and philosophy. The unheard reality on the private comlink was something else entirely. Okay, Mirka, why move the RV point to here? And what are you playing at with the tourists? Morel turned his head as if he was staring at the bar and ignoring his brother. The Tinny and his sidekick specialize in stolen industrial data, and Kit, high-tech bounty hunters. They were asked to source. I love that word, don't you? Source, like procure, so flexible. Anyway, they were asked to find someone who'd supply untraceable laboratory equipment to beat the cloning ban. Dry lining supplies, vast cleanroom systems, plus specialist droids to fit it all. Paid in cash, credits, and no records. Kosai, I reckon. Where? Doruma, tropical pleasure palace of the Mid-Rim. Odo consulted his planetary database as it scrolled down his HUD. Water everywhere. Oceans, almost all of which are pretty well unexplored, and likely to stay that way for some time, because of the lovable marine life that was revived from the ice sheet when they terraformed the place. Tropical vacations, no other industry, but that's where the illegal lab stuff was heading. She is setting up a new research center. Who's funding it? Don't know yet. Okay, let's work through it. Battle of Commando. Separatist forces spring her. She's already stripped her critical data off the Tipoca mainframe, some of which I could reconstruct from the copy I took the other week. So she was expecting to leave. Sips then take her to Namodia. She stiffs them. Jazarana, and ends up on Vinai. Morel folded his arms and looked the other way, doing a good mime of exasperated boredom. From Vinai, she loops back into space. Last place they'd expect her to run, and heads for the Kularian system, specifically Daruma. Evidence? My tinny chum got the stuff delivered to the freight port here. Tinny being fond of a little insurance just in case this client skips without paying. Checks out the flight plan and, with a couple of transfers en route, it all ends up on Daruma. So why is he telling you? He was sourcing items for me, extra firepower, and go faster stripes for the submersible. You've got a dozen or more lowlives you could ask for the hardware. Morel was smiling. Odo could hear it in his voice. Not ones that allows show up doing business with Arcania. Odo had to admire Morel's ability to sift data. The risk-taking genes had expressed themselves even more in him than the rest of them. But he had a surprising patient tenacity. Once he'd lashed on to the scent, he could give Murd a run for its money. So, We need to beat a location out of someone. Once I find the pilot who delivered the consignments, nobody's talking. I don't care how tight-lipped folks are. Somebody always talks, sooner or later. One detail, one word. Something always slips. Sooner or later was the problem. As always, time was the enemy on every level. Kosai wouldn't have just the separatists hunting her. The Kaminoans had to know where she'd skipped with their data, because if Morel could see it was missing, they'd have worked that out a year ago. But they wouldn't dare tell their main customer, the Republic, that they were in trouble. They'd want to get her back quietly and without fuss. They'd have engaged bounty hunters too, if they had any sense. The economy depended on it. And the Arcanians, Camino's closest rival, knew she was missing. Everyone who mattered did. Gossip in the industry was hard to control. Cloning had gone underground to beat the ban, and there were plenty of companies that would want the top Iowa bait on their staff. So the Knolls might be elbowing a dozen pursuers out of the way to get to her if they didn't stay ahead of the pack. She's on the run from at least 3 interested parties, then, Odo said. This is getting crazy. Do you think Lama Su is using the excuse about the end of the current cloning contract to cover the fact that he's lost her data? And now it's crunch time. How critical is it to production? I don't care, Meryl said. As long as I get my hands on her, skinny gray neck, and she hands over whatever it takes to give you and me and all our vote of full lifespan. TK0 nudged Morel. Are we boring you? You are very quiet. We're meditating, Morel said. We are very spiritual people. We mender aid, communing with the Manda. I can feel that from here, said Gabe. When do we get paid? Morel slapped 2 50,000 credit chips on the table. You can keep the change if you find me the fighter pilot who delivered the kit to Daruma. The Arcanians might pay us more, but not as much as the Kaminoans. Is that who you are looking for? Look, said Morel. Oda braced his brother had that edge in his voice that usually preceded skating on very thin ice for the sheer thrill of it. He was always the one who liked rapid roping from the highest point in Tipoca City, and he had broken bones to show for it. Only the Kaminoans can clone legally. Everyone else is a Chakar who threatens their business interests. Get it? Not really. Morel managed a little puff of exasperation. Odo got ready to shut him up with deafening high-pitched feedback on his helmet audio. Okay, we are Republic agents, Morel said wearily, stemming out illegal cloning wherever we find it. Because Middle Aid care about law and order. I'm going to slap the Osik out of you one day. America, don't do this to me. TK0 bristled, which was no mean feat for a droid. This is hardly the time to get snotty and organicists, is it? I was only asking. If you have to deal with Commando, fine. I think it's time you tightened his nuts, Otto said to Gabe, seeing as you're his mechanic. Find me the pilot who did the last leg of the journey, DK. My little best cut aid, and I'll pay them as well. Morel took one of the credit chips from the table and flipped it between his gloved fingers, like a conjuring trick, before making it vanish up his sleeve. No penalties. Not the pilot's fault. Got it. That's the Republic's problem, not ours. Okay, can do. And I want it by the time I finish the modifications to our ship. Oh, hang on, said Gabe. 48 hours. Morel stood the remaining 50,000 credits piece on one end and flicked it over with his forefinger. Gabe grabbed it with impressive speed. Back here. Pilot's name and location. Don't listen to him. We'll do it, Gabe said. Checking the chip with a counterfeit scanner and batting away TK0's extended manipulator arm. Trust us. I do. Morel patted TK0's Durasteel casing with slow emphasis, making him sound like a gong. I'm very trusting. Oda switched back to internal comlinks. Quit while you're ahead, Navad. The two tech hunters got up to leave. All Oda could think of was that time was wasting, and more interested parties seemed to have a reason for hunting down Kosai every day. But who's she's looking for? Who's bankrolling her? If the Tipoca hatcheries found they couldn't replace the critical tech, and the Republic hadn't paid the next installment, there were several contractors waiting to fill that gap. Wow, TK0 said, spinning his cranial sections 180 degrees to train his photoreceptors on the doors. More of you. Did someone just open a new box of Mandalorians? Otto looked up just as Morel did. Scarata was walking across the cantina with someone dressed in his father's Munin's armor. Yeah, it's Boudica, said Morel. I couldn't stop him from coming. Jedi General Barton Jusek hadn't just shown understanding and compassion to his Special Forces troops. He'd gone native. He wore the Mandalorian armor that Scarata had loaned him to masquerade as his nephew during an elaborate sting operation with a Jabimi Terracell. Oda knew it was smarter than swaggering into the cantina in his full Jedi rig. But it was no secret now that Jusek liked it. Vode, Jusek said, taking off his helmet. He extended his arm, and Maria clasped it in that hand-to-elbow grip that was a common Mando greeting. Jusek's untidy blonde hair still needed cutting, but at least he trimmed his beard. We really have to talk. Yet Geftica, 473 days after Geonosis. The rain had stopped and the sun had come out, which was a problem. Damen and Aten could no longer rely on their hoods for disguise as they tailed ARC Trooper A30, Sol, through the city. The ARC was walking briskly heading north. Tracy paused to buy food from the street stall and slipped the wrapped packages inside his coat. Then he walked into the huge transparent steel foyer of the Uniwale terminal, forcing them to follow. "How far are we going to take this?" Damen whispered. "I thought we'd just follow him and see where he goes." Remember Sergeant Kell giving 7 Fight an earful for doing an unplanned tail on a suspect and nearly screwing the whole operation. Scarata's light years away. Darman wondered why he'd ever thought Aten was the quiet, thoughtful one. That won't stop him. He hasn't just got eyes in his backside. He's got hyperspace transceivers. Okay, what's the alternative? Spot a Vard who's MIA? Say, well, who'd have thought it? And carry on chatting. Darman wasn't sure where prudent improvisations ended, and winging it began. Special operations were a blend of tediously boring planning and moments of what he could only think of as insanity, on the brink of death. But Aten was right. MIA was MIA, and so was neither M nor IA right then. And he had intel that they needed. The terminal had a high-domed roof that reminded Darman of Tipoca City. Sol grabbed a ticket token with the casual, unconscious ease of someone who did this journey frequently, then sat down on a bench at a distance from the ticket barriers, staring at the ever-changing timetable board as he unwrapped one of the small packages he'd bought on his walk and began eating the contents. It looked like fritters of some kind. Darman and Aten wandered around the small storefronts on the terminal concourse after they grabbed their tickets window shopping, as far as other travelers were concerned. "He's got 5 Unirail lines to choose from," said Aten. "You'll think he's spotted us. Either he's better at surveillance than we are, and he has, or he delays committing himself to a directions out of habit." It was the kind of thing an Ark would have been trained to do. To move around without drawing attention to himself, or giving a pursuer any notice of a last-minute change of direction. Darman began speculating about what Sol had been doing in the last couple of months. Fairfeck. The man looked as if he lived here. The very phrase made Darman uneasy in a way he found hard to pin down, until he realized it was a bewildered envy of a world that had more options than he knew how to handle. So is this all part of the deep cover? Then that even the rebels can't find him, and don't know what he's doing, so they can't compromise him if they're caught, or if they're traitors. This is crazy. They would know. They would oversee his tasking. I think there's loads of things Zay never told her. Maybe Sol gets his instructions directly from Palpatine. How can anyone run a war that way? Aten didn't answer. The war was messy, dirty, and chaotic. They'd learned, but this was the first time Darman had faced the possibility that brother soldiers might be doing things that cut across his own mission. The 2 commandos killed a little more time standing at a store window, speculating on why anyone might want a vivid purple business case, watching Sol reflected in the transparency window. Then there was a faint clacking sound, as the departures board changed, and the Ark made a move for a departure point. "What are you carrying?" Darman asked, following Sol's path. Vibroblade, Blaster, and Geralt Vaya. Aten boarded the railcar and sat down several rows behind Sol. "Maybe I should have brought the E-Reb. Arcs aren't invincible. Anyway, what makes you think he's going to get violent? If we've crashed into a covert op of his, he'll use us for target practice." Darman recalled Morel saying he'd never really trusted Arcs, because they'd been ready to kill clone kids during the Battle of Commando, rather than let them fall into Sep's hands. Removing two commandos who got in his way wouldn't make Sol miss a beat then. The railcar was half full, and yet wasn't Coruscant. The population was a tiny fraction of Galactic City. This was no anonymous sea of strangers who didn't take any notice of blue skin, tusks, or any of the other distinguishing features of a vast range of resident species, bustling everywhere. The people here noticed, all right. Darman and Aten got the occasional glance because he assumed they were small details that marked them out as not local. Or maybe some thought they'd just passed another man who looked exactly like Darman. Sol, sitting with his back to them, took out a holozine. Darman read all of the ads on the Unirail cab's walls and made a note of a couple of speeder rental agencies and a used speeder emporium. Outside the railcar, yachts streaked past well-maintained apartments buildings, vessels landing at the spaceport, rolling his hills in the distance. Darman followed the Unirail route on his datapad and tried to think of this city as a target he was setting up for an assault. He couldn't think of another mission he'd been on where that prospect disturbed him. This was somewhere he might live, but the Merits who'd take over weren't like him at all. He'd never considered if he had a side to be on beyond his brothers. All that stuff about the Republic and freedom was just words that he hadn't started to fully understand until recently. The last thing he thought about under fire was the Republic. It was always the brother right next to him, and the hope that both of them would still be alive tomorrow. The railcar slowed as it approached another pickup point, and Sol appeared to still be reading. But as soon as it came to a halt, he jumped to his feet and shot out the nearest exit. Aten and Darman scrambled to reach the doors before the railcar moved off again. "Yeah, he does this for a living, all right," Aten said. "Talking of which, how does he eat? I'll stop speculating and just ask him. Yeah, maybe he'll make us a cup of calf and tell us about Iat's places of interest." Sol's exit point brought them out in a less well-heeled neighborhood than the city center, but it was still clean and orderly. It wasn't the lower levels by a long shot. They followed the Ark to a low-rise apartment buildings, fronted by a neat lawn, where he climbed the external stairs, walked along an access balcony, and went into a second-story apartment. Darman and Aten walked past slowly, feigning conversation, and circled the block to check for the rear exits. This was where they were at their most vulnerable. There was nowhere to hide to stake out the apartment, And this wasn't a commercial center where they could hang around with nobody asking why. Darman reached into his tunic and pulled out a sensor. Then he opened the line to Nina. Got our coordinates, Sarge. Transmitting now. Nina responded instantly. Darman could imagine him, waiting, pacing up and down and giving Fight a hard time while he fretted. Copy that, Dar. Apartment 7. What are you planning? Darman glanced at Atin. We'll walk up to the door. We'll run a sweep to see if he's got company. If we like the odds, we'll knock. If we don't, we walk away. Set a spy cam opposite the building, and return to rethink and monitor. Is that okay, Sarge? I say that's not what we came to do, Dar. But an arc on the loose, without explanation, could throw the whole mission, so we might as well clear it up. Darman had a nagging thought. He had to get it off his chest. Ask Aiden why he didn't stroll into Iyat and check it out. The Knoll had only been in theater a few days. Even if he'd done Reese, there was nothing to say that he'd have seen Sol at all. Darman regretted the question immediately and hoped Aiden hadn't heard. Will do, said Nina. Leave your comlink open, okay. Darman and Atin ambled across the road and made their way to the apartment. Darman held the sensors as inconspicuously as he could, clasping his hands in front of him, as if waiting for Sol to answer the door, and swept it slowly side to side. He kept his voice at sub-auditory level, letting the sensors on his throat transmit on the comlink. I'm only picking up one body in there, Attica. Shame you're not a Jedi. Yeah. Maybe they should have created Force-sensitive clones. And then we could have ditched half the kit. Okay, knock-knock time. Darman stood to one side of the doors, hand discreetly on his blaster, and Atin pressed the bell. Silence. They waited. The sensor showed someone moving to one side of the door, but there was no noise. Sol was a careful man. An ARC trooper couldn't be anything else. Then the doors parted. Sol obviously didn't have a security holocam installed. For a split second, he stood side on to the entrance, his face all wide-eyed, shocked. Then his arms came up and Darman spun away instinctively as a blaster bolt shaved his cheek. Atin cannoned past him with a sickening thwack of bone. Sol fell back with Atin on top of him, and Darman hit the door control. For the next few moments they grappled, trying to get Sol onto his stomach, to pin his arms. But the Ark lived up to his reputation, breaking his knee up hard in Atin's groin, and landing a fist in Darman's face. Eventually, they got him face down, and Darman tried the old restraining trick of hooking two fingers into Sol's nostrils and jerking back hard. It must have hurt him plenty, but not half as much as he hurt Darman. When the Commando loosened his grip, and Sol sank his teeth hard into his hand. Demoralizing, painful, and causes serious infection. That was what Scarata said about human bites. Darman roared with pain, and brought his fist down on the back of the Ark's head. Atin pounced again and got him in a headlock, with his knee in his back. Right, Atin panted. He had the tip of his vibroblade pressed into the hollow of the base of Sol's skull. Unless you want this right through your spinal cord, Navad, pack it in and listen. Do it then, Sol said. I'd rather die. They sent you to kill me, didn't they? Go on, finish me off. If you've got the guts. Diamond blood welling from his bite marks. Got a plastered tie around Sol's wrist, and knelt back to nurse his throbbing hand. Bacta, clean the wound. What was he going on about? They sent you to kill me? We are definitely going to have to get a speeder to move him. Da. Went one or something, Aten said. You okay? Yeah. Nina's voice cut in on the comlink. Citrop Omega. What do you mean, Sol? Damin asked. What do you mean they sent us? Who's they? Who are you? RC-1136, Daman. Omega Squad. We thought you were MIA. You are Alpha 30, right? Get knotted, Sol said. Just get it over with. Etten tied the ox ankles with plaster tape and got to his feet. Well, I think you need a chat with a colleague of ours. Damin held out his datapad. Speeder rental, Attica. I made a note. You get the transport. I stay here. Okay. You can keep Captain Charisma quiet for a while. Omega. Nina sounded at the limit of his patience. What the chap happened? Alpha 30 thinks we are going to kill him, Sarge. We are bringing him back to base until we get this sorted. Moron, Sol sounded. As defiant as ever. You've got no idea, have you? What? You're dead men. He didn't say it like that, like a threat. Sol said it like Scarata did. That was what Scarata used to call them back in training. His dead men. It was all part of his unconvincing veneer of abuse. Because the whole company knew Sergeant Cal would give them his last drop of blood. But the words now made Damen shuddered. We all are, sooner or later, he said. It was sooner for clones than most.